Hello, my name is Frank Robinson. I am an industrial hygiene consultant for the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Public Health for the Health Hazards Control Unit, HHCU. I will be giving an overview of our asbestos and lead programs as part of the Centralized Intern Training, or the CIT. So let's begin. What is asbestos? Asbestos is a naturally occurring rock or mineral that is found in the earth. What is an asbestos containing material, or ACM? It is any material that contains greater than 1% asbestos by volume. So beginning at the upper left corner and going clockwise, what you see there is a open pit mine that can be found throughout the world, such places as Canada, Russia, Brazil, are some of the countries that do open pit mining. The next slide is you see a rock, pretty much a unmilled rock or mineral that comes from the earth. And you see on top of the quarter, basically what you have there is a mill or refined asbestos that has been husked of its impurities on top of the quarter. And then lastly, another rock shown as you see there. So when we talk about asbestos, there are 6 asbestos forms. 3 of which, or 3 types of the asbestos that's most commonly found in building materials, you see as chrysotile, amosite, and crysolite. Now, chrysotile is the most commonly found, with 90 to 95% of all building materials is made of chrysotile. Now, there are many building materials or other products that may contain asbestos. As you see in some of these photos, blown-in insulation or fireproofing. You have different types of flooring, such as linoleum and tiles or floor tiles, and mastics and glues underneath it. Also caulking that you may see around doors and windows, as well as cementitious siding on the exterior of homes and other buildings. Also, you may have joint compounds that may be smeared on walls, as well as ceilings, various pipes insulation, roofing shingles, sealants, as well as plaster and stucco, and popcorn or textured ceilings also be found in various buildings and homes. Here's other photos of such ceilings, some that are in damaged condition, as well as the middle slide showing fireproofing on structural beams as part of the spray or overspray of such beams. And more photos of flooring, including its mastics underneath, some that has been broken up or peeled up also. And you have insulation and gaskets. As you can see, some that are in damaged condition. Typically, a lot of the boilers and gaskets will be found in mechanical rooms in a lot of the buildings. They're also known as boiler rooms as well. Cementitious materials, whether we're talking about roofing or piping or siding, you see photos there of the siding on the exterior of the homes. AC cement pipes that you will find as part of the water systems throughout the United States of America. Over 600,000 miles of such pipes exist in this country today. Other photos of exterior suspect materials, including asphalt roofing shingles, which some you may find dislodged and on the ground, damaged condition. So we're going to transition to the health effects. The primary route of asbestos exposure is inhalation. And so you see the respiratory system represented in this photo here, starting at the oral cavity all the way down to the lungs. And the trachea, the throat area, will house hair-like projections called cilia. Now, the cilia primary function is to remove any microbes and debris from the interior of the lungs, and that may get dislodged and it clears it out. So we cough or exhale it out of our bodies. So this serves as a very important function in that regard. Now, when we talk about the health effects, we certainly want to mention the three primary diseases related to asbestos exposure. Asbestosis being one, lung cancer, and mesothelioma. Now, the asbestos latency period ranges from 10 to 40 years. So what is a latency period? The latency period is the period of the time of the manifestation of disease that results from the initial exposure years earlier. And so if someone worked at a plant starting in 1960 and they got exposed in 1995, we're talking about a latency period of 35 years from their first exposure to a toxin such as asbestos to the manifestation of the disease in 1995. So let's talk some more about asbestosis. Asbestosis is a buildup of scar tissue causing a stiffening of the lungs and also difficulty in breathing. The typical latency period here is roughly 15 to 30 years of time. It does reduces the lung capacity, and also scar tissue buildup may even increase after the exposure has ceased. One important factor here, asbestosis is a scarring of the lung tissue, but it is not a cancer. It is not a cancer. Lung cancer, which there can be many causes of lung cancer, but asbestos is certainly one cause that may happen. It is the most common asbestos-related disease, being lung cancer, and the typical latency period here is roughly 30 years after initial exposure. So, when we talk about lung cancer, we associate that with those who smoke also, and there's a relationship here. Those who smoke and work with asbestos unprotected are at a much greater risk of contracting lung cancer. The risk is 80 times. This is known as what we call the synergistic effect, where we combine two effects of smoking and working with asbestos combined that will give you 80 times the greater risk of acquiring lung cancer. Last but not least at all is mesothelioma. It is a cancerous tumor in the lining of the chest and abdomen. It is always fatal, and it has been highly associated with asbestos. It has the longest latency period out of the big three. It often takes 30 to 40 years after initial exposure for someone to get mesothelioma. And once you acquire this fatal disease, typically within 6 months to 2 years, it does turn out to be fatal. So now we're going to talk about the regulations, also the regulations that govern our program. And we start on the federal level with the NESHAP regulations. This is under the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency umbrella. It's known as the National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants. It is found in the CFR, which is the Code of Federal Regulations, 40 CFR, Part 61, Subpart M. At the state level, we oversee our asbestos hazard management program. So by the laws that's governed by the North Carolina General Statutes 138-444 through 451, we have the rules that we enforce, which is found in 10A NCAC, which is the North Carolina Administrative Code, 41C.0600. Again, the National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants, which is NESHAP. So when we talk about NESHAP, there are certain terms that we use and guides us in enforcing the regulations that we set forth. There's a term known as RACM, or RACM, which is known as the Regulated Asbestos Containing Material. And so when we talk about that, we're talking about any friable asbestos containing material. For example, fireproofing in this regard. But you also have what you call Category 1 as well as Category 2 non-friable ACM. So when we talk about Category 1, that's pretty much non-friable ACM that has become friable. Or by the methods of Category 1 non-friable becoming friable by being sanded, or the material being sanded, grounded, cut, or braided. Now, Category 2 also is non-friable ACM that is crumbled, pulverized, or reduced to a powder during demolition or renovation activities. Also can occur there. Now, one of the key provisions of our NESHAP regulations that we enforce here at the HACU is the inspection process. Before you do any type of demolition or any renovation activity to a building or facility, you first must thoroughly inspect for the presence of asbestos. So the owner, or the building owner, or the operator that's in charge of that process, they must thoroughly inspect for the presence of asbestos. Now, the inspection must be conducted by an inspector who is currently accredited by the HACU. So, in line with this, we have what we call notification, where the owner or the operator must notify the HACU if the renovation activity disturbs the amounts of ACM below. And so those numbers seen there is 160 square feet of material, 260 linear feet, or 35 cubic feet of material. For example, if you have, let's say, 1,000 linear feet of pipe insulation that is asbestos, then that owner or operator must notify HACU of that amount as part of the notification prior to doing any abatement. or if you're talking about 500 square feet of asbestos floor tile and mastic, for example, as well. Emission control is another integral part of NESHAP. One of the main mantras for NESHAP is no visible emissions. And so, in line with that, we must, or the contractor must use established work practices to keep the material wet, to use leak-tight containers, to dispose of the waste properly at a permitted landfill. No visible emissions to the outside air, and an on-site representative, such as an accredited asbestos supervisor for the state of North Carolina, will be required on such jobs. And again, we're governed by our state regulations, which is found in 10A, the North Carolina Code of Administration Code, 41C, .0600. So let's talk about some of these individually that's found in our North Carolina Administrative Code, starting with .0602, accreditation, which states no person shall conduct asbestos management activities unless accredited. There are exceptions though. If you're dealing with any type of small scale, short duration activities, or if you're a homeowner that's doing work in your own personal residence or removal of asbestos, they are exempt, as well as government regulatory personnel. So, we at HACU have certain requirements for accreditation. Training and work experience are some of the requirements that we have. There are a total of 9 disciplines that we oversee as far as accreditation. As states below: worker, the asbestos worker, supervisor, inspector, management planner, designer, air monitor, supervising air monitor, roofing worker, and roofing supervisor. So the ones you see with the asterisk requires a certain amount of work experience. 60 days is our requirements for the work experience to be deemed acceptable for accreditation for those disciplines in the state of North Carolina. So, .0605, the ACM removal permits. A permit will be required for the removal of more than 35 cubic feet, 160 square feet, and 260 linear feet. Applications must be postmarked 10 working days, that's with a Monday through Friday calendar, prior to the project start date, along with any other project requirements deemed applicable. So in this instance, we must receive the application being postmarked in our offices 10 days prior to the project starting. Now, one of the unique features we have on our website is the ability for those who are looking for a North Carolina accredited individual, such as an inspector or a supervisor, abatement supervisor, or a project designer. They can look and find it by county or city to the company or person that they're looking for to acquire their services for things that would be asbestos related that could be useful to the project. So this is very helpful for those who may want to find someone's accredited, and this is a great first step in order to do so. So our asbestos-related regulations encompass a lot of different agencies, OSHA being one, along with, of course, the EPA and our own North Carolina state regulations. But we also have local air quality programs, Buncombe County, Forsyth County, and Mecklenburg County, which govern their own NESHAP regulations for those counties. If there are any questions as it relates to any asbestos related questions, please contact us at the HACU for assistance. We'll be more than happy to help. So let's transition now to our North Carolina lead-based paint hazard management program, specifically the EPA Renovation, Repair, and Painting Rule, or the RRP. So when we talk about the RRP rule, what is applicable here? So any RRP or renovation, repair, and painting activity conducted in a residential or child occupied facility built before 1978 is subject to certain rules and regulations. So any contractor hired for compensation must be both North Carolina renovator and North Carolina firm certified and use lead safe work practices. So let's pick it back to target housing. This would be any house built before 1978 or any child occupied facility. This could mean child care facilities as well as daycares. In this instance, that would be under this umbrella. So what is the probability of lead-based paint? So if we look at this slide here, you see this this table, and you have 3 sets of dates. So let's talk about um, these dates here. So the topic here is older homes are more likely to contain lead-based paint. So what we see here that before 1940, you had roughly 87% of all homes that had some amount of lead-based paint. That number dropped somewhat between 1940 and 1959 to 69%. Then you have more of a significant drop off between 1960 and 1977. Now, the source of this data is coming from the American Healthy Home Survey, lead and arsenic finding. This is back in April 2011. So why the big drop off between 1960 to 1977? Actually, beginning in the mid 1950s, they started to phase out a lot of the lead-based paint uh, in cities and certain municipalities. And due to that drop off, more homes was using less lead-based paint and painting both the interior and exterior of these buildings. However, you still were able to find some homes built in the 70s with some amount of paint, just not as much as it was previous decades. So, how can you be exposed to lead? There are 2 ways. that you see here, eating or ingestion, and breathing, inhalation. So when we talk about eating or ingestion, these are lead particles on hands that's transferred to food, drinks, or cigarettes. But particularly with children under the age of 6 or even younger at toddler age, infant to toddler age, they do what we call a lot of hand to mouth contact, and therefore they are more susceptible to become lead poisoning through this method of ingestion. Now, breathing or inhalation, where lead particles get into the air, generally by means of renovations or construction, and mainly adults in this sense will be the ones to inhale the lead particles uh, into their lungs. Lead poisoning is one of the leading environmental causes of pediatric health problems. It can be entirely preventable, and it also could go undiagnosed, as some lead poisoned children do not appear to be sick at all. So, what would be the health effects for adults? As you see here, some could include irritability and headaches, hypertension, increased blood pressure and anemia, which is low iron. Also, damage to the CNS or the central nervous system, kidneys, and reproductive systems. Also, convulsions, paralysis, even, and death at high exposures can occur as well. The key thing about lead is it can be both acute and chronic in its effects. Acute meaning almost an immediate severe reaction, and chronic, just like asbestos, will have a longer latency period where it will take more likely years, decades to develop. Both is true with lead. So, what is a renovation? The term renovation is broadly defined as any activity that disturbs painted surfaces, including most repair, remodeling, and maintenance activities. So, this could include some of the typical renovations of replacing windows, weatherization projects, and demolition of painted surfaces, including paint, shellac, and varnishes on those surfaces. Now, when we talk about the RRP, if there's a disturbance of a certain amount of these lead-based materials, then or surfaces greater than 6 square feet per interior room on the inside, and or 20 square feet total on the exterior surfaces. So once those numbers have been triggered, then the provisions of this RRP rule will take place. And that will include regulating the area, putting down the appropriate poly, using lead safe work practices, wet methods, HEPA vacuum, all those things will come into play at this particular point. This is also known as the minor repair and maintenance activities. So if we're talking about projects that's smaller than 6 square feet or less, uh, painted surfaces per interior room, or 20 square feet or less, of those painting services on the exterior work, then it is not necessary to use those safe work practices, although it is recommended that you do so of any amount. There are prohibited and restricted activities when it comes to lead-based paint abatement and renovations. Projects should not include these activities as listed below, whether it be open flame burning or torching, sanding, grinding, or blasting. In this case, you would need to use a HEPA vacuum attachment with the shroud. In such cases, this will allow good suction of paint chip particles and debris and would lessen the risk of lead-based paint contamination of the surrounding work areas, and it would greatly reduce any potential exposure to the workers performing those activities. Also, you do not want to use a heat gun with a temperature over 1100 degrees Fahrenheit. Using a heat gun over this temperature could greatly increase the risk or danger of fire. And a fume could be created where a gas or vapor could be dangerous to inhale. What are some of the trades affected or used in doing renovations in general? Some of the examples on this slide includes carpenters, plumbers, electricians, maintenance personnel, and painters, obviously. Their work could impact such components as HVAC, sheetrock drywall, window replacement, door replacements, and also other components could be affected as well. In each instance, people engaged in these trades must take proper safety precautions, including wearing proper clothing and PPE, which is personal protective equipment. Also following the RRP rules of regulating the work area with poly and not allowing lead dust to migrate outside the work area, while constantly cleaning any debris that is being created. So, what would be some of the requirements for the North Carolina firm certification? Any firm that will be doing work here in the state of North Carolina obviously must be a North Carolina certified firm in order to solicit, bid, offer, or perform renovation activities. They must apply using our own lead RRP certification application annually. They also must identify North Carolina certified renovators or dust sampling technicians that will be employed by the firm. And the annual fee for the firm certification application you will submit with that will be $300, also annually. So how to become a North Carolina certified renovator or dust sampling technician? So as far as the certified renovator is concerned, you want to complete an EPA or state accredited 8-hour initial training course. We at the HACU do not accept any online courses, or as it says here, no online courses are accepted in North Carolina. You must complete the North Carolina application for the certified renovator or dust sampling technician. And you can include a copy of the certificate and a color photo along with that application. Just to emphasize, there is no fee for the individual certified renovator application, but a $300 fee applies to the North Carolina certified firm only. Now, every 5 years, you will have to complete a refresher course. It is a 4-hour refresher course prior to the expiration date, and you will resubmit that along with another application to us at the HACU. So what are our options to determine if lead-based paint is present? There are several. Number one, you can assume that it is positive for lead-based paint. Or you can test. Now, the test should be completed either by a certified North Carolina renovator or a certified North Carolina lead inspector. In North Carolina, the results must be provided to the client prior to the work starting. Now, there is another very important provision of the RRP rule, which is information distribution. So when we talk about target housing, as we mentioned before, any housing built before 1978 or child occupied facilities, the firm must distribute what they call a Renovate Right pamphlet. This is authored by the EPA. This Renovate Right lead pamphlet must be distributed to the owner and occupants before the renovation starts. So no more than 60 days prior to the renovation and obtain written documentation or send by mail 7 days prior. Now, if there's a situation where it's going to an apartment complex, then that Renovate Right pamphlet could go to the property manager. They would have it, and then they would take the responsibility of distributing it to the occupants of that apartment complex. They would be the ones to sign for it. It is important that they do get the signed copy back. The contractors get that signed copy back from the owners and occupant. That must be included as part of their record keeping. Here's an example of the Renovate Right pamphlet. This pamphlet would be very useful for those that receive it to understand why it is important to follow the rules and regulations. Also, it talks about the different dangers of lead-based paint and how you can avoid getting contaminated or poisoned by it. It's very useful to all parties involved. So, as a North Carolina certified firm, they're going to be the ones responsible for ensuring that the certified renovators and trained workers are used. Also, a certified renovator must be assigned to each renovation project that they cover. And the work must be performed according to the work practice standards as deemed by the RRP rule. And the pre-renovation education, i.e. the Renovate Right pamphlet, requirements must be performed. They must receive and sign for that pamphlet, and you must have it part of your record keeping that deals with this pre-renovation education requirements. and also the record keeping requirements are met. Now, we just talked about the firms. What about the individual North Carolina certified renovator requirements themselves? They must be available on site or by telephone at all times. They must regularly direct the work to ensure safe work practices are followed. Containment and dust and debris stay within the work area. They must have copies of their initial training and refresher certificates on site. They must use EPA recognized lead test kits. They also can use paint chip methods using the heat gun or even the XRF if applicable. They will prepare required records, and such sample forms can be available in the EPA Small Entity Compliance Guide booklet. As I mentioned before, the North Carolina Certified Renovator firm or renovator must be available on site or by telephone at all times. They must provide the training to the workers on assigned tasks. And they must be present at the work site during posting signs, setting up containment, and cleaning. And they will conduct what they call post-renovation cleaning verification. So, as part of the work practice standards overview, occupant protection, posting up the signs, containing the work area, which includes a lot of things that's listed here. Isolating the work area so that people, pets will not disturb the certified renovators and their workers while the work is taking place. They are removing belongings or covering with plastic impermeable sheeting, poly for short. Closing and covering doors and windows in the work area, as well as closing and covering the HVAC duct openings with critical barriers there, as well as any interior and exterior work. We're talking about covering the floors or the grounds on the outside. And again, using certified firms, certified renovator, and trained workers on these projects. So the work area, basically, the area that certified renovator establish the area to contain the dust and debris in. So when we look at examples of poor work practices, this is a situation where you do not see any poly on the ground, but you see a whole lot of chip paint has covered the steps and the ground as well. This could be potentially a violation of our RRP rules in the state of North Carolina if an inspector was to come out and see this horrible, horrible scene. Same thing here. You must contain any type of debris within the work area. There is no poly to contain it. There has been no effort to get up using the help of vacuum the paint chips at all. Uh, we're talking about potential contamination of the soil that could affect houses, not just the house in question, but any surrounding houses that may be within a certain area as well. And this is a situation where you have poly that has not been taped and secured to the surfaces that it's covering. Right here is a situation where the cleaning is insufficient. You still see specks of chips and debris on the table. The cleaning method here is insufficient. Here's an example of proper component disposal where the poly is taped up. You have stickers of damage or danger, lead contained stickers. In the work practice standards overview, do not use prohibited or restricted work practices, as we already covered. Making sure that the work area is clean continuously, daily. And what does this mean? This means no visible dust or debris that you see or residue. You're using the HEPA vacuum along with wet methods in doing this process of cleaning. You are properly disposing of any waste that's collected. And you will perform a post-renovation cleaning verification. Now, when we talk about this is the card that is used as part of the cleaning verification. This cleaning verification card will be the card to ensure that after all the cleaning has been completed, you will take a wipe of the surfaces that has been cleaned, performed, and you will compare it to the cleaning verification card. Upon comparison, if it shows that it is clean, as clean as the picture shown, or lighter, then it has been a successful cleaning process. However, if it does fail the cleaning process by the amount of dirt shown on the cloth, then you must re-clean those areas. And then our record keeping. So, in accordance with the RRP rule, all records must be kept for a period of 3 years. So if there's a project taking place this year in 2024, for example, those records must be kept through the year 2027. And if record keeping has not been achieved on a certain project that has been investigated, then we're talking about fines that could occur, up to $5,000 actually, fine in North Carolina. So for more information as it relates to our application, our training providers list, rules, Renovate Right pamphlet, certified firms, as well as certified renovators, and a lot more can be found on our website, as you see the link below. And this right here is our web page, our front web page, where if you go to the left side at the blue portion of the page, you'll see where it says lead management. And below it, it tells you renovation, repair, and painting. A lot of the information that you saw on the previous slide can be found there. I encourage all to go to our website and get more information as needed. For questions or additional information, you can always contact us at the HACU at 919-707-5950. And our physical address is 5505 Six Forks Road, second floor in Building 1, here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And you can always go to our general email for any questions that you may have also. I thank you for your time. This is Frank Robinson. Thank you again.